It is now time for Diary of a Wrestling Fan with Bill Chase. And now, here he is, the man who once tried to FedEx a box of chocolates to Baby Spice, Bill Chase! Thank you, Mr. Podcast Announcer, and welcome to another edition of Diary of a Wrestling Fan, the podcast that chronicles my 33, almost 34, amazing years of being a fan of professional wrestling. Thank you for listening on Spotify, on Anchor, wherever podcasts are streamed. Hit subscribe, hit follow, do what you gotta do to follow this podcast and keep up with recent episodes. And if you're listening on YouTube, hit that subscribe button right now. Alright, wrestling fans, indeed, we are going to be talking about WrestleMania 13 as we continue the road to WrestleMania this year. And I know it's something not exactly the most stellar card in the world, but bear with me, it was a very interesting time in professional wrestling, no doubt. March the 23rd, 1997. I was just 9 days removed from turning 14 years old. So, before we get to that, however, I want to give, of course, a quick plug to Pro Wrestling Ontario. Follow us on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and, of course, subscribe to us on YouTube. If you listen to this podcast on YouTube, scroll to the right of the video screen. You'll see a link to the channel, Pro Wrestling Ontario. After the podcast is done, click on that link, subscribe to the channel, check out our videos. We got a great deal of content. We got complete shows, both Iron Cup tournaments. We got lots of matches, episodes of Foundation with lots of matches in them, including the Foundry tournament that took place recently. Also, our new show, The Pillars of Pro Wrestling Ontario, hosted by our very own Ryan Knight from Knights of the Squared Circle. Most recently, he sat down with our openweight champion, Tyler Hill. So check that out. It's a very interesting interview, which I no doubt will respond to one day. But either way, check out the channel, hit subscribe, like the videos, and tell us what you think. Leave some feedback. Again, that's Pro Wrestling Ontario. Alright, well indeed, let's get right into it. WrestleMania 13. Oh my goodness. As I get started with this podcast with a kitty cat on my lap who's purring away. So if you hear her, that's who it is. But regardless, WrestleMania 13, very interesting time. Of course, wrestling in 1997, not just the WWF, but obviously WCW, even ECW doing a lot of huge stuff at this time. They're getting ready for their first pay-per-view ever. So we're smack dab right in the middle of the Monday Night Wars. It has been going on for just over a year, close to a year and a half at this point. And you know what? The winners, again, it's a cliche, but it's true though. The winners of the Monday Night War. Yeah, I usually say, oh, WWF. Well, yes and no. But the real winners, the fans. Why? Because we had hours upon hours of wrestling content to keep us occupied for and entertain all week long. And for a 14-year-old kid, as someone who just turned 14, that's huge. That is absolutely huge. Now, I will say this now. Even though WCW was winning the war still at this point, as a matter of fact, WWF would be still another year away from a Monday night head-to-head victory, something was happening. Okay, WCW was still red hot. There's no question. The NWO doing their thing, getting more dominant. I know people said it was watered down, kind of growing, but still, they say that, but be that as it may, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, and Hulk Hogan were still the shit. You know what I mean? They were the not the shits, although I'm sure some people think that about them, but they were the shit. And that's the thing. But the WWF knew what was happening. I think Vince McMahon truly realized this is something that he has to be concerned about. And it's not as if he spent his waking hours worrying about WCW, but he was more worried about making his product better. But at the same time, though, on the other side of the coin, WCW was a cause for that. But them dominating the Monday Night War, and even they're getting dominated everywhere. House shows, pay-per-view buys, merchandise, you name it. WCW was beating the WWF across the board at this point in March of 1997. But again, in early 97, something, however, started happening. And, you know, despite what the naysayers, the haters want to say, I don't even like using the term haters really, but in this case it applies. The return of Bret Hart, I'm not saying he was the exact cause of it, but he certainly was a huge part of it. Their television started improving significantly. Now, I don't know when specifically it was, but I know it was in 1997. I believe Mick Foley mentioned this, that Vince McMahon pretty much talked to the roster, pretty much acknowledged that things were not going great. And that he's hoping that his talent can kind of rise above and reach into depths of their characters, their performance aspects, and bring something to the table that will maybe bring their audience back. I'm paraphrasing here. But that was along the lines of what Vince wanted. He wanted them to tap into more of their creativity and wanted to enhance his product any way they could. And obviously, with the type of roster they had, this group of guys was more than willing to do that. And of course, by January 97, things had looked good on television. There were interesting characters. There was a great story going on between Bret Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Now I'm going to do a whole podcast on this one day with the 1997 Royal Rumble. Now, this was in the Alamo Dome. Now, Vince was taking great pains to make sure his product looks. Now, thing is, that was the thing Vince McMahon was always big on, was presentation, and that's not a criticism. That's more an observation than anything. He had to make sure that the Alamo Dome in San Antonio was full. And to be fair, no matter how papered it may have been, numbers have gone back and forth. They're saying almost a third of the crowd was papered. Some say it's a little less than that. Some say it was still 48,000 legit, almost 50,000 legit, and maybe 10 or 12,000 papered. Regardless, it doesn't matter. Point is, even without the papered audience, drawing over 40,000 fans or close to 50,000 fans or whatever it was, that's still impressive for this time. Now, it was around this time, too, that obviously the issues between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels were at the forefront. Both of them were babyfaces at this point in January of 1997. Bret had only been back for about 2 months. But yet they had built a tension between the two because Vince felt, obviously, and rightfully so, that there was big money in a rematch between these two. Now, despite the business and how poor it may have been doing at times, some things had started to slowly emerge in terms of numbers. House shows had actually improved for the WWF from 1995 into 1996. There was a significant improvement. However, they still weren't drawing what obviously they would be hoping to. But regardless, having Bret back certainly helped that aspect of business. You also have the fact that rising stars like Stone Cold Steve Austin, like Mick Foley as Mankind, long before he was the Game, he was still Greenwich Snob, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, but you know what? He was prominently featured on television constantly, and a blue chipper by the name of Rocky Maivia. And we'll be hearing more about him later. I heard he did okay for himself. But anyway, I digress. So, clearly the WWF has they're setting up the dominoes in place for a resurgence. Now, the thing is, much like Rome, a wrestling company doesn't rebuild in a day. And in hindsight, the WWF was clearly well on their way to rebuilding themselves into something better, trying to repair the damage that many of the years in the 90s had done to them. This wasn't just 1 or 2 years. This wasn't just WCW winning the Monday Night Wars every week. This was a combination of things that had led up for probably a better part of 5-6 years. It had all led up to this point where the company now really needed to snap out of this funk that they were in and get their engines roaring again. They had the guys, they had some of them anyway. Sure, the roster was still, you had your fake Razor Ramones and fake Diesels. You had a talent such as Too Cold Scorpio dressing in a really nice onesie. Really funky onesie as Flash Funk. And yeah, so and you had Barry Windham was a stalker, then he was a blackjack. Yeah, okay. It's Billy Bob, again, I quote Billy Bob Thornton and Bad Santa all the time with these things. They can't all be winners, kid. But either way, you could see that there was something there. Of course, you had also Psycho Sid. Shawn Michaels again. Now, leaving January 1997, Shawn Michaels was the WWF champion. He had just won it back from Sid at the Rumble, and him and Sid had a pretty good feud, I thought. So, again, there's a million different versions of these stories. There's Bret's, there's Shawn's, there's other people's. It's all over the place. Apparently, the plan was for WrestleMania 13 to have the Bret Hart Shawn Michaels rematch. Now, apparently, I guess the title, depending on who you ask, was or wasn't supposed to be on the line, because apparently Shawn was asked to drop the title to Psycho Sid in February. Now, that would mean Bret and Shawn wouldn't be a title match. To be fair, at this point, it really wouldn't need the title. And I actually, because some people have said that, and I agree. At this point, the rivalry between Bret and Shawn, and this wasn't even, it hadn't even come close to scratching the surface of how tense this would become, obviously, by the end of the year. It was already at the point where you could have this match, and it didn't need a title. But that being said, however, and I see other people's arguments too, because other people said to me, well, the whole reason why this whole thing got heated between the two was Bret losing the title the way he did in the Iron Man match. Also true. So, but to me, I think the match would have been a success either way without the title if it had taken place at WrestleMania. But spoiler, it didn't, and obviously I'm getting to that. So, in February of 1997, Shawn Michaels apparently saw, again, depending on whose story you believe, apparently saw a doctor and was told that his knee was severely injured and he'd have to quit wrestling for the foreseeable future or forever even. That's when he, on the special edition of Raw Thursday, Shawn delivered that emotional "I lost my smile" speech, which you look back on it now, it's laughable. I'm sorry, but it is. Nothing against Shawn. Again, I've learned to love Shawn over the years, obviously. At this point, I hated him. But I know I liked him during his 96 run as a kid. I just didn't care for him here. Gives his little speech. And I remember watching this on TSN. And my dad says to me, he's like, like my dad mockingly crying. He never liked Shawn Michaels, and I think I mentioned that before. Like, he's just doing the mocking crying and that, and I thought it was pretty funny. And to be honest with you, my dad doing that kind of provoked thought in my 13 going on 14-year-old self that this is phony. Like, what a wuss. He's trying to get into fighting Bret. And that's what I thought. I remember going to school not long after this, because I don't think we got it live. I think we got a replay of it over the weekend or whatever. And I remember going to school not long after this, and my friend Adam Pryor and my buddy John Forjak, we were talking about this. And John, who was quite knowledgeable when it came to, especially, knowing, like, wrestling and whatnot, he felt it was phony, too. Adam, however, was a Shawn Michaels fan. So, he was kind of, well, if he's injured, he's, and then he's not, like, outright, like, he's not adamantly defending him, but he's more, what's the term I'm looking for? He's just more, he didn't see it the way John and I saw it. And everything got switched around. Now, Bret and many others maintain to this day that Shawn just wanted to get out of dropping the title to Sid and doing a job to Bret at WrestleMania. Also, some do maintain, however, Shawn was legitimately injured and maybe just it wasn't as bad as he thought it was, or maybe the doctor made it. I don't know. The story goes in a million different ways. Personally, I think that, again, much like a lot of things in wrestling, telephone, tell a person, tell a wrestler, or whatever, the truth is somewhere in the middle. And where the different variations of it that all the guys are telling add up somehow, and that's probably what it ends up being the truth. So there you go. But as a fan, I'm thinking Shawn is full of crap. Like I said, in 96 when he won the title, even though he beat Bret, I still liked him. I had some of his merch. I was a fan. But when Bret returned and they started bantering back and forth, I noticed something. I noticed that Shawn came off as a complete dick. And I alluded to this, and check out the archives, Montreal Screwjob Part 1. Part 2 is still coming, folks, I promise. I've run into a lot of issues lately. So I'll get some interviews. I need a few more interviews for a complete episode. But anyway, so... and I start to turn against him a bit. Now, I still actually cheer for him in his match against Sid because, to be honest, I didn't care for Sid much. I mean, I didn't hate him, and I understood, like, even as a kid, I understood, and I understand now why he was so popular and over with fans. I mean, just that overall presence and that intensity he brings is just enough to make anyone gravitate towards you. But the thing is that I just didn't see him on the level of those guys, and that's just me. That's just me. Okay, but I don't know. But nowadays, like, again, in hindsight, being older, obviously, I had the benefit of seeing that. Okay, obviously, he did belong in that class at that time. But back then, I just thought, I don't see him. I see even Shawn as that. Even though I was turning against him, like, Shawn is at a different level than Sid. I think Bret, Taker. I thought all those guys were just on a different level. So obviously, leading up to WrestleMania 13, things are all over the place, but Bret Hart and Steve Austin still have this great thing happening. I noticed there's something different with Bret. Now, again, I've alluded to this on many episodes of this podcast that people often insult his promo skills, and they said it was after he turned heel. No. His promos leading up to all this stuff were great, long before he actually turned. You know, he's kind of criticizing the WWF behind the scenes and the way they handle things. Bret's becoming a very bitter champion, ex-champion with a chip on his shoulder. His obsession with becoming the champion again is driving him. And yet, the way people talk about Bret in shoot interviews, saying that this is how sometimes he really felt. He felt he truly deserved to be a champion. He felt the title was quote-unquote real. But I think that notion is ridiculous because a lot of veteran wrestlers have said, you know, being the champion may be a different context in terms of suspension of disbelief in making it seem real to fans and whatnot. But you know, some wrestlers just see it as, okay, well, it's money, it's, you know, it's a good payday and whatnot, but they don't treat it like it's phony. I think some people there's some wrestlers out there who don't feel the need they have to be a champion to make money. And those are the ones that criticize Bret for, you know, being the way he is. But at the same time, though, there are a lot of champions that even Stone Cold Steve Austin has said, if you're not in it to be the top guy, then why are you in it? And being the champion means a lot to wrestlers even to this day in any company. I've seen guys in the indie circuit get emotional over becoming a promotion's main champion because it means something to them. But that's the very thing they're criticizing Bret for. And what I meant by suspension of disbelief, however, is that they have to make it seem real, even though that they may not see it that way themselves. Again, some guys are like that, but there are also a lot of guys, again, like Bret, like many others, who felt being the champion was very real. But I think the way they try to, again, lump in Bret Hart as the Hitman character and Bret Hart the man was that he, you know, because the way he talks, the way he's spoken openly in shoot interviews and whatnot, and he's given many over the years, that he really felt that way. And that his bitterness was very real. Now, I think the bitterness he harbored in real life and the bitterness he harbored on television were very different. And Bret's my all-time favorite wrestler, and I'll stay here and definitely tell you he was bitter about a lot of things for many years. He still is bitter about some things, but I think it was still very different. I don't think there was much realism in that sort of bitterness. I don't think the real bitterness really came until much later. And there was some of it there. If you read his book, obviously he had some bitterness during his career. I'm not saying there was none. I'm just saying it got worse after the screw job. Spoiler! Yeah. But anywho, so we leave off now as the Final Four pay-per-view. And I remember what a great match it really was. Here you have four amazing talents. Stone Cold Steve Austin, Vader, Bret the Hitman Hart, and The Undertaker. Now again, the WWF's main event scene at this point is top-notch. And who's not in this match? Shawn Michaels, Psycho Sid, and Mankind. So again, there's 7 guys right there who definitely bring a lot to the table at any given point in their careers. And at this point, they are, in my opinion, tried and true main event talents already. Now, some could debate Mankind because he hadn't main event a lot of pay-per-views, but he was in a high-profile feud with one of their top guys. So ever since he came into the company in March of '96, a year prior to this. So that's the thing, he wasn't even... Like Sid, Mankind, and Shawn weren't even in this match. Shawn, of course, was injured, allegedly. So, you still had a great deal of guys who, without a doubt, knew how to deliver a tried and true performance in the main event, and they did that here. The winner would face Sid the next night on Raw. Bret won the match. It was elimination. Won it by eliminating The Undertaker, but he was kind of distracted by Austin trying to get back in the match and get at Bret. Bret wins. Then he loses the title to Sid the next night. I was pissed. I was freaking pissed. Stone Cold Steve Austin yet again. I hated Steve Austin. I liked watching him, but I hated him. So, of course, this is going to lead to their match at WrestleMania, the submission match. And I gotta say, I am a sucker for storytelling. In the brilliance of these two as performers was on full display here in the Raws leading up to this event. Now, here's the thing I gotta point out, okay? The WWF, as I mentioned, was trying to make a transformation. They're trying to make their product better. They'll do that first and then maybe worry about beating WCW. A lot of changes were made. They brought in the new title, the European title. They switched Raw to 2 hours and rechristened Monday Night Raw into Raw's War on March the 10th, 1997, only 2 weeks before WrestleMania. So the timing of this, again, shows the smart prowess of Vince McMahon as a promoter. New paint of coat. There you go. But now they gave their show a nice makeover, new production, and it looked good. It looked good. What the show was on television is what the production should be. I know that might not make much sense, but bear with me. The way Raw was being presented is the way that needed to look, that setting needed to look. The Titantron, performing in front of larger arenas again. They were starting to perform in front of larger arenas. I know they still were, selling out some of these places, but the crowds were getting bigger again. You could see it. So a lot of things were happening leading up to this. Bret was slowly going insane. It's almost comparable to I shouldn't say this, but it's comparable in the sense of what drove them to this, but it's not comparable in the way that they were driven. Bob Backlund. But what they have in common is they're both angry ex-champions harboring resentment for the reasons of why they lost the title in the first place, and it finally just gets them to the point where it consumes them. It drives their obsession, and that's what was happening to Bret here. He so desperately needed to be a champion, and the go-home Raw. Because again, the matches were now, it was going to be Taker versus Psycho Sid for the title, and Bret versus Austin in the submission match, which those two were the centerpieces of this show. Now, obviously, when I get to the show itself, I'll go over the other build-ups to this. But these are the main focuses of Raw. In that go-home Raw, that steel cage match with Bret and Sid, where Taker, again, more the thing, it's not personal, but he doesn't want Bret to win the title because there goes his shot. Slams the door on Bret. Goes after Sid, though, to send him a message. Then Austin he cuts a promo later. I'm jumping ahead a bit. Of course, the big moment, though, everyone remembers from this is when Vince McMahon, doing commentary at that time still, tries to interview Bret. Bret shoves Vince on his ass, grabs the mic, and says, frustrated isn't the word for this. This is bullshit. And Bret just goes off on a tirade that, and again, Bret had been kind of, again, people say whiny, but again, that was the point of the character. He was bitter, he was angry, and he was pissy and moany. But this time he just goes full, loses it, and this is a side of Bret nobody has seen, and it is shocking to say the least. Fans had started turning against Bret a bit because of his whining and gravitating towards the more rebellious "I'll kick your ass" and just laugh about it later Stone Cold Steve Austin. Austin appears at the Titantron in a great promo, just mocking Bret for being a whiner and saying, "You blew it. It could have been you and me for the title." Blah blah blah. It was just such good stuff here. And the main event guys were really firing on all cylinders for this. So WrestleMania 13, in my opinion, whether again on paper it looked great. Those two matches, Taker and Sid and Austin and Bret, were the matches that sold me on this show 110%. Now let's get to the show itself. Again, like I said, it takes place on March the 23rd, 1997. It is live from Rosemont Horizon in Rosemont, Illinois, suburb of Chicago. A sellout crowd of 18,000, just over 18,000. Pay-per-view buys were just around between 235 to 240,000. To this day, I think the least bought WrestleMania of all time. At least the lowest grossing. And yeah, so needless to say, things were still not going well. Apparently fans just saw this as another WWF pay-per-view that didn't want to watch it. It still felt like a WrestleMania in a lot of ways, but be that as it may, even at this time, it wasn't quite what it would become. So we begin with the free-for-all show. And I remember, normally I mentioned stories how I have people over for these. For whatever reason, nobody was able to come over for this one. I can't remember why exactly, but none of my cousins, none of my friends, they were not able to come over for this one. So, I remember sitting there by my lonesome with my bag of Lay's ketchup chips. That was around the time Mark Messier was doing the commercials. And I see the free-for-all, and there's Billy Gunn taking on Flash Funk in the free-for-all show. Now, Billy Gunn was truly on the verge of history. That's right. He would shake the wrestling world up. Just a month after this. And you know what I'm talking about.
Rockabilly. Woo! Yeah. Rockabilly all night long. Rockabilly, sing my song tonight. Oh, it's alright. Yeah, show the boys what I'm all about. Make those girls scream and shout me loud. Rockabilly's such a handsome man.
Couldn't resist. But at this point, he's still Billy Gunn, still wearing the jeans and whatnot. Him and Bart had split up several months before this. Both of them were going nowhere at this point. But Billy gets the win here. I guess getting him ready for his transformation. And honestly, a talent like Too Cold Scorpio, I'm sorry. I don't think the Flash Funk character was terrible necessarily, but he was above that. And I'm not, people saying, are you one of those smart fans who think everybody should be champion? No, but I think he could have done better. I think he could have been at least high up in the Intercontinental aspect of things. So, there's that. But regardless, Billy Gunn gets the win here. I just remember really not paying attention to this all that much, and yeah. So on to the show itself. Your hosts are Vince McMahon, Jim Ross, Jerry the King Lawler. And we kick things off with a 4-way elimination tag team match to determine the number 1 contenders for the WWF Tag Team Championship. And look at this lineup. The new Blackjacks. Blackjack Wyndham, formerly Barry Windham. Of course, a nod to his dad, Blackjack Mulligan, one of the original Blackjacks. Blackjack Bradshaw. Yeah. Look, I may not be the biggest Bradshaw fan, JBL fan, or whatever. I love Barry Windham. And Barry Windham actually was Blackjack Mulligan Jr. very early in his career. So there's still an allusion to that as well. But this went over like a fart in church. And sadly, Barry Windham, as great as he was at times, just did not give a shit at this point. I will say this about Bradshaw. Love him or hate him, and believe me, there have been times that I've hated him. But he's trying. He is committed to it. I will say that about JBL. Everything he's been given, he's been committed to. So that is why I don't object to him being in the Hall of Fame or whatever, as some people do. And there are times where the JBL character that he would play years later was genuinely entertaining. So there you have that. And I like the APA too. So, yeah. I'm just not a huge, I guess, mark for him or whatever. But either way, I don't hate him as much as others do, but I also don't love him either. But anyway, back to the match. Sorry. Got sidetracked there again. The Godwins. Henry and Phineas. I personally like the Godwins better as heels. They would turn not long after this. I thought they were much better heels. Two amazing talents, Doug Furnas and Phil LaFawn, but sadly they just did not connect with this audience. But both superb wrestlers. And of course the Headbangers. And again, very committed to their characters they both were. But at this point, fans just didn't seem to give a shit. The Headbangers would garner a following as time went on. But at this point, nobody seemed to care. So this match opens WrestleMania, the biggest show of the year. The tag team division, we were far away from the Hardys. The Hardys were actually, I was around this time, they'd be on the roster as enhancement guys. Edge and Christian, Edge and Christian were still doing the independents. I think Edge was, again, signed around this time, to like a development type deal. Christian was not signed yet, however. I don't know the exact date. I'd have to look it up again, but Edge was signed around this time. The Dudleys were in ECW, doing pretty well there. So yeah, a lot of those guys we're still pretty far away from them. We're still actually 6 months away from the new age outlaws. I remember watching this match thinking, and to be honest, as a fan, I liked Furnas and LaFawn. I thought these guys were fun to watch. I enjoyed their little rivalry with Owen and the Bulldog. But again, looking back, you can just see most fans just didn't care about them. They were brought in Survivor Series 96, and they were put over strong over on Owen and Bulldog, who were still the tag team champions back then, and the show they're tag team champions as well still. They've had a pretty long reign at this time. That's the thing. No matter how talented you are, sometimes you just have to connect with a certain audience. And I've seen it happen a million times. And I guess the direction that, and again, these fans, let's face it, were headed in the direction of Attitude Era. We weren't there yet, but we were on our way. And whether the WWF or Vince McMahon want to admit it or not, the NWO was a big proponent of that, of the new way that wrestling fans thought about things. To me, Furnace and LaFawn, I think they were just meant for a different time. If they were going to be in the WWF. And again, this isn't even a knock on them. If they were around in the 70s or the early 80s even, I think they would have gotten over huge. That's just me. Anyway, the Headbangers win this match. Nothing came of that. They had their title shot. They didn't win. And I remember watching this and just like, I couldn't stand... I would eventually end up liking them, but I couldn't stand the Headbangers. The Godwins I just didn't care about. New Blackjacks definitely didn't care about. And I grew up watching Barry Windham, mainly in WCW, but he was, again, his best days were behind him, but he was still a very good performer. Doing a lot of tag team wrestling with Dustin Rhodes. I enjoyed the tag team with him and Dustin Rhodes. But this, again, how I said, that WWF had a great main event scene at this point. This kind of where the problem was. Their undercard was still weak. There were characters that fans just did not seem to relate to and were not emotionally invested in. Which brings us to our next match. Rocky Maivia, the Blue Chipper, the reigning Intercontinental Champion, taking on the Sultan. And clearly here he wasn't doing it for The Rock. Yeah. Actually, he did the honors for The Rock here. So, Rocky Maivia, I don't need to tell you who that is. If I do, then, well, obviously I don't even know why you're listening to this podcast. But regardless, Dwayne came into the company again a few months before this at Survivor Series, was put over real strong in an elimination match. He had a lot of intensity. You could see that there was something there. I remember talking to my cousins about Rocky Maivia, and they thought he was a dork. I think it was my cousin Jamie who said Rocky Maivia is a dork. And in hindsight, he was right. But I don't know. For some reason, I'm like, well, this is going to be the type of guy that we're going to be watching, like, main event with Bret. Now, obviously, I wasn't right about that. In, like, a year or two. Thinking Bret was still going to be around in WWF. And they're like, they laughed. I'm like, you just watch. And then, of course, he wins the Intercontinental. Now, Rocky won the Intercontinental title, upsetting Hunter Hearst Helmsley, a.k.a. Triple H. Yeah, who'd have thought that match taking place on Raw Thursday, where Rocky would become the Intercontinental Champion, a huge upset. Now, he'd been pretty much undefeated, at least on television at this point, for the most part. Hadn't suffered a pinfall or submission loss yet. And he looked like he looked the part. There was something there. JR was always putting him over strong commentary, and obviously we know why. Vince was keen on him, it seemed. But sadly, the whole smiling blue chipper babyface again, we're leading into the Attitude Era. This is not what fans wanted. I personally, speaking for myself and myself only, I saw something there. I had no idea he'd become that kind of star. I just figured he'd be another guy in the main event eventually, because he was, looked talented enough to do so. But I didn't think he would become one of the biggest stars in the history of professional wrestling. No idea that was coming. So no, I'm not going to take credit for that. So he upset Hunter on Raw Thursday again in a match that wouldn't have drawn any money if you dipped them in gold and dragged them through Fort Knox, and yet 3 years later they were headlining pay-per-views and drawing astronomical numbers. So there you go. Just goes to show you never know when the next guy is coming. Never know who you're looking at that could be the next one. I will also admit this. I didn't see it in Hunter. I thought he was just going to be, another footnote. I was hoping, anyway. No, I'm not kidding. Actually, I thought he really was just going to be nothing in the end of the day. The Sultan is, of course, the future Rikishi, and the past Head Shrinker Fatu, and past Make a Difference Fatu. It's nice to know that there were some of those guys that, Vince and company just didn't give up on. And obviously, Rikishi was one of them. Because, he had a decent run as one of the Head Shrinkers. The Make a Difference Fatu thing, where he's, the anti-drug, talking to kids about the streets thing. Obviously, that sucked. That gear that he wore, that very colorful gear. And then they rebranded him as the Sultan. You can see he's starting to gain a lot of the weight here that he would eventually lead to the size that he would have as Rikishi. So the Sultan, apparently the backstory was from somewhere in the Mideast. He got his tongue cut out. That's why he wears a mask over his face. He's managed by the Iron Sheik and Bob Backlund, two former rivals who come together to manage this this talent who they want to bring to the top. Spoiler, he did not make it to the top, at least not as the Sultan. He'd obviously do much better as Rikishi. Hell, he did much better as Make a Difference Fatu. Let's face facts here. And again, this lies the problem why WCW was kicking their ass at this point. Again, as superb as the main event scene was, and to be fair, even though Nitro was winning in the ratings, the main event stars, from the research I've done, they drew good quarter numbers even if they weren't beating Nitro. So fans still wanted to see the guys that were in the main event scene. It's just the guys like the Rocky Maivias and the Sultans they didn't care to see. This match, again, back then I didn't think much of it either, even though I kind of liked Rocky, but I knew he was going to win. And what this match is best remembered for, other than being Rocky's first WrestleMania, was that Rocky Johnson, his dad, came into the ring and helped him as there was a post-match beatdown involving, of course, Shiki Bibi, Mr. Backlund, and the Sultan, and they did a nice little thing together. And I think it was pretty cool. And Rocky Johnson still looked pretty good here, like in terms of just his overall look, and you can tell he enjoyed being in the ring at WrestleMania, something he never got to do in his career. So far this show is not exactly banging, is it? Well, that would change. But not with this match. No, I'm kidding. Hunter Hearst, and actually I am kidding this time. Hunter Hearst Helmsley against Goldust. Back then, I did not care. Goldust did nothing for me, especially as a face. I should say he did nothing for me as a face. As a heel, I hated him because, again, he was a great heel. Helmsley, hated him too, but sometimes I changed the channel when he was on because he was just annoying. At this point, he had China with him. And the rivalry between him and Goldust actually wasn't bad. I just couldn't get into Goldust as a fan. And no, it's not because of the things he did in the past. It's just I felt his character was, again, I enjoyed watching him more as a heel. And I was so bored during this match. I remember my mom and dad were upstairs. They didn't go to a movie this time. They were upstairs. I'm trying to remember who was over. Somebody was over. Somebody in the family. It actually, I think, was my Uncle Bill. Actually, yes, it was my Uncle Bill, because if it was my Uncle Roy, he probably would have come downstairs and checked on what was going on, because he wasn't a big, he lost his interest in wrestling somewhat at this point. He still would have, at this point, would have checked what was going on, because my dad's still dead. So no, it was my Uncle Bill, and he was over, and my Aunt Sue might have been with him. But I remember I just went upstairs to kind of chit-chat with them during the middle of this match, because I just didn't care. I went back down for the finish. Obviously, Hunter won. China, they made China look really good here. I'm surprised Marlena Terry Reynolds wasn't injured legit. She was just being, again, tossed around like a rag doll. They put it over on commentary, unless it was just Terry's selling was so good. That might have been the case. But regardless, it looked great. They made China look like a complete monster here. And Helmsley at this point had just kind of paid for his punishment from taking the whole click hug in Madison Square Garden in '96. He was supposed to win King of the Ring. Was pretty much just jobbed out on television for a while. Then he won the Intercontinental title. Things started improving for him a bit. He had this rivalry with Goldust. He was put over most of the time. So, there you go. And watching this now with fresh eyes, this is actually a pretty solid match. Seeing it more recently, you could see, again, whether you like him or hate him, Hunter was hungry. You can see he was a very hungry talent that wanted to work hard to be on top. Whereas Goldust, again, 9 times out of 10 you're going to get something from him. No, I shouldn't say that. 999 times out of 1,000 you'll get something good from Goldust. Dustin Runnels, Dustin Rhodes, whatever. He tried hard too. It's just back as a 14-year-old kid, I did not care. I couldn't care less. Next match, I had a little more interest because it was guys that I enjoyed watching. It was a tag team title match between two heel teams. Owen Hart and the British Bulldog were the tag team champions. However, there was some dissension building up, which I'll get to in a second, against Mankind and Vader. Now, like I said, Vader's run in the WWF had been very polarizing at this point. He had the main event run with Shawn. Now, they built him up really well for several months. He had the main event run with Shawn Michaels, which sadly ended with Shawn being a little bitch, having a temper tantrum in the middle of the ring at SummerSlam. And yes, Vader screwed up. But oh well, people screw up in wrestling matches. You don't kick a guy in the blunt in the head and say, move. I mean, I'm not saying Shawn's frustration wasn't valid, it's just the way he handled it. Can he have waited to get backstage and chew him out? And I always hated that. And Vader's run just never fully recovered after that. He was still a prominent member of the roster, though. He was still pretty much a top-tier guy at this point, so he wasn't down the card as he would become in the next year or so. But Mankind, of course, had a really good feud with The Undertaker. Wild brawls, insane matches. Just a great rivalry built just on hatred and wanting to beat the piss out of each other. Paul Bearer, of course, had turned heel at this point. People, in hindsight, don't enjoy that. They say Bear should have stuck with The Undertaker. I don't know. I think we got, again, if Bear doesn't turn heel, we don't get Kane. Which is, the build-up for that would be shortly after this. So I think Bear turning heel was a great thing. Now some say maybe his type of persona didn't fit with Mankind and Vader, and that's debatable. But I don't know. This little slimy heel manager, the shtick that he had adopted now at this point, which again, he had played as Percy Pringle for years and did a good job at, it worked here. Now this is kind of thrown together, really, to be perfectly honest. There wasn't like a huge backstory to this. Owen and the Bulldogs' backstory is the main focus here, and you're wondering if they can stay on the same page, because there had been tension building up between them since about the Rumble. Now they won the titles back in September of '96. So they're well into a good 6-month reign here at this point. A reign that would last all the way to May. And it was at the Rumble where Owen made it look like an accident he eliminated Bulldog, but clearly it was blatant. And then there's the tension built up between the two even further with the European title tournament finals in Europe. Yeah, I know. In Germany, and Bulldog, in a great match. Just look it up. It took place I believe March the 3rd, 1997, on Raw. Raw was in Germany at that time. Great match. Maybe Bulldog's best next to the Bret matches. Maybe even, you know what, I'd even say as good. I'm boldly saying that it was just as good as his matches with Bret. So yeah, something about Bulldog working with the Hart boys. But anyway, so there's tension there, but they're still tag team champions. They're trying to make it look like they're on the same page, but clearly they're not. During the entrance, even like Owen comedically, just as he's won his second Slammy that weekend, yes, where he became the 2-time Slammy Award winner. Woo! He did it again! And Owen was just amazing. Like, again, I hated Owen too, obviously, because, again, he was Bret's, dipshit little brother. But I loved watching him. He was just amazing to watch. And he jumps in front of the Bulldog during the entrance here, kind of does a little pose in front of the camera. It's great. Just the little things Owen did is what made him so good. And there's an interview where they're trying to say there's no captain of the team. And then when Bulldog walks away, Owen's like, "I'm the captain. I'm the leader." Just such good stuff here. Owen is just a great slime ball still. He was just a superb heel. It does not get, Owen is like revered in a big way, obviously, but I think he even deserves more credit for some of the things he did. I do. I think that any aspiring wrestler could learn a thing or two from watching Owen Hart tapes. Not just as a wrestler. I mean, he was great there too, obviously. In the ring, but as just the persona, the character that he played in his heel run in the '90s. He was just amazing. Him and the Bulldog worked well together as a tag team. This match, again, like I said, even though despite both teams being heels, at least it had intrigue in it because I saw these guys as stars. As a kid, I saw these guys as stars. I still do. And it wasn't a bad match. It wasn't, again, you think on paper this actually could be a classic, but it wasn't necessarily that. But, this was something better than people, I think, remember it being. I think it was a little too long. I think whatever story they were going for just kind of disappeared near the end. And of course, Lawler comedically notices the Hart family doing hell on that ringside. I'm like, oh no, here we go. Yeah. Stu, your son's wrestling. Heenan and Lawler. I mean, Heenan obviously didn't do it half as much as Lawler, because from Heenan, I'm mainly referring to Survivor Series 93, when he was making jokes about the Hart family. But Lawler, oh my god, he was great, and apparently Stu liked him too, and so did Helen. They thought he was funny. So this match ends in a double count out. I was kind of rolling my eyes, just like, oh, really? Could have had a finish here? But whatever. And Owen and the Bulldog looked like they were going to finally break up pretty soon. But lo and behold, Brother Bret would save the day. Spoiler! Speaking of which, now, at this point, I'm enjoying this show, but not blown away by it. Like, I went upstairs and I said to my dad, I said, I mean, it's a good show, but it doesn't really feel like WrestleMania. But again, the last few years, I haven't really felt like WrestleMania. I don't know, I mean, to me, WrestleMania 10 still felt like a WrestleMania, but 11 and 12? And 12 wasn't actually a half bad show. 12 was pretty decent too. Again, great main event with Bret and Shawn, obviously. An underrated match between Taker and Diesel. And some other good stuff there. The backlot brawl. There was some good stuff happening, in that show. But again, it just didn't feel like a WrestleMania. I don't know. But this match would change everything. So I went back downstairs, and they were airing the build-up between Bret Hart and Stone Cold Steve Austin. I'm like, oh, here we go. The beginning of this feud, all the way to now, I can't talk about enough. Bret comes back, revered as a hero. Fans wanted him back. But the beauty is, leading up to their first match at Survivor Series, is Austin, again, Austin in the fall of 96, again, when people emphasize Stone Cold Steve Austin, they mainly emphasize, of course, his Attitude Era run, which, to be fair, that was his biggest money-making. That was where he had more eyes on him. So I understand that. But man, Steve Austin, late 1996, after he won King of the Ring, he was just on a whole different level of performer. And he was making the most of every millisecond, every tenth of a second that he was on television. They did those really cool black and white vignettes where Austin's calling out Bret Hart, mocking him even for his pink ring gear, and you call yourself the best. Well, I've been improving on the best week in, week out. Where are you right now? You're sitting at home in Calgary. It was such good stuff, and I was right into it. This is what I meant by their television improving. By the time they were going into 1997. But Bret returned in late 96, despite rumors of him going to WCW. And Bret wanted to work with Steve. He felt this was a guy he could do serious business with and have great matches with. And when Bret made his return in October of 96, he even gave Steve the endorsement of the best wrestler today. He even said that in the promo when he accepted the Austin challenge and the two would fight a Survivor Series. The way this feud began and the way it would lead up to at this point, oh man, talk about a 180. Like I said, Bret was seen as the returning hero. Austin was the new badass on the block. And, he was starting to gain a cult following at this point already. The Austin 316 thing had caught on. But be that as it may, though, in November 96, he was still, again, more hated than, loved. Their match at Survivor Series 96 was of epic proportions. But the way, even though Bret won the match clean, but it wasn't a dominant win. He didn't win with the sharpshooter. He He didn't win with like any like finisher. He won with the finish I talked about WrestleMania 8, where Austin puts on instead of a sleeper hold like Piper put on, though, it was the $1 Million Dream. Again, variation of a sleeper hold, obviously. Bret does thing where he kicks off the corner buckle and lands on top of Steve, enough to put all his weight on him for a pin. And again, it was good to bring out that finish again. It hadn't been used since WrestleMania 8, at least not on television. And, the way Austin was eyeballing Bret as he walked backward up the aisle, you could tell it wasn't over. And I remember watching that match saying, I want to see more of this. I was watching with my buddy Adam Pryor. He came over for that match. I said to him, I said, I want to see another match between these two. I want to see more. Like, that was badass. And of course the feud continued. Austin could still continue being a thorn in Bret's side. Lead up to, they kind of were renewing acquaintances even more towards the Rumble, where Austin, clipped Bret's knee in that, attacked him on an episode of Superstars, stuff like that. They were keeping the feud going. Austin still wanted to get to Bret and prove he was better. Because the way Austin saw it, Bret's just another guy standing in his way of being on top. He didn't care about his reputation. So, of course, the Royal Rumble finish happened where Bret throws Austin out, but the refs don't see it. Austin comes back in, throws out Bret plus Taker and Vader, which, of course, led to the Final Four. Austin, wins the match by being smart. Bret loses his shit. And that's where the build-up that's where the changing of their attitudes, no pun intended, began. Bret was furious, feeling that he was being shortchanged by the company, not being given a fair chance to become champion again, being screwed at every turn. And hey, I felt he had a point. But to be honest with you, I mentioned this in the previous podcast as well, that I wasn't knowing what to make of Bret's attitude change at this point. I was still behind him more than I was Austin, but still, it's just like he is being a whiner. I mean, I thought he had valid reasons, but still, it was getting annoying at times. So again, like I said, the build-up on TV, Bret just, becoming more and more bitter every week. Steve costing him the title. Austin's obsession was a bit different than Bret's. Bret's obsession drove him to insanity, where Austin's obsession was actually getting under Bret's skin. There was a difference there. Austin's obsession was just beating Bret to a pulp. Proving again he was better. That he's the best. And I could feel that this was going to be something special. I didn't realize how special. At this point, again, after what happened the week prior on Raw, Bret shoving Vince, getting really angry. Bret gets a good reaction here still. He's still, I think, I'd say, if I had to guess, I mean, Vince kind of oversold it on commentary as a mixed reaction. It was still favorable more than it wasn't. There were some people not loving him. I'd say it was like maybe 75-25, like 3/4 still loved Bret in that building going into the match. Austin got a really good reaction, but again, not everybody loved him either. I'd say his is about 60-40. The 60 loved him, 40 still hated him. And it's obviously I know with the math, some people still like both. Some people like both these guys. So there you go. You could feel the unbelievable hatred between these two. The story that had been built up in their rivalry, the way it started and the way it had ended. That finally someone got under Bret's skin so much that it just drove him to change who he is. And Austin just keeps getting better as time goes on. That he knows that he's gotten to Bret psychologically and he's going to use that to his advantage. And this is his type of environment. No rules. All you got to do is submit your opponent. Ken Shamrock is the guest referee here. This was a way to bring Ken in, and he got a good reaction when he was introduced. He was very well known, obviously. UFC was not the phenomenon that it would become, but it had a following, and it had actually had some very successful pay-per-views at this point, and Ken was one of the guys that were on those successful pay-per-views. He was one of the elite talents and, big stars of UFC in its infancy. So anyway, because it's a good way to bring Shamrock in because it's his type of environment too. And even though he doesn't have like referee training that way, all he has to do is just see who submits. He doesn't really have to maintain much control here. And his presence didn't overtake the match, but it added to it. So right away, these two are just, again, right off the bell ringing, they're off and running. You could see these two just wanted to maim the other. And the tension. There's nothing better than a personal issue in wrestling. And these two had it. It had gotten personal. My favorite wrestler was being targeted by this badass who was starting to gain a following. The changing of the guard in terms of the way fans perceive certain wrestlers. Baby faces like Bret were becoming passé, as Vince would put it, maybe. Brawling through the crowd, brawling around ringside. But neither one would let up on the other. Bret was showing a bit more intensity. Everything, that chip on his shoulder was still present. He wanted to win this desperately. But what would his obsession bring him to the brink of? I didn't take my eyes off this match even to take a sip of my pop. I did not go into my bag of chips. I was into this. And some will say, oh, Bill, you're in every Bret match. Oh, I mean, yes, but not like this. I was thinking this is the coolest thing. There's a point where I'm standing up and I'm like cheering along with the match and that, and as Austin starts bleeding, I'm like, oh my god. Because again, blood was still rare at this time. I mean, it happened at the Final Four pay-per-view with Vader, but that was a whole different story. In the way that the crowd is in the palm of their hands. Everything they did in this match served a purpose. Every little thing they did made sense. And that was just the greatest thing. That is why this match is my all-time favorite match. And it's just built and built. The tension just grew and grew. My heart was racing at this time. And thinking to myself, despite the fact that I may have been, hit or miss the way Bret had been acting lately, I kick his ass. In the ring. That great finish. And if people criticize the way they place weapons and whatnot, the way the weapons and the objects were placed in this match still, they made perfect sense. It wasn't like, oh, it's just there so I can pick it up later. No. It just happened to be where they were at a convenient time, but it wasn't contrived. To me, weapon placement is something that's a lost art in wrestling. It was there because of something that had happened before, not just because it was placed there because they might use it later. But no, the great finish, Austin tries to choke out Bret with one of the cables. The ring bell is there. Bret grabs it, desperately, you could see. He gives Austin a whack in the head with it, sends him down. Sharpshooter time. And the crowd is losing it. Some are cheering for Bret to win, some are cheering for Steve not to give up. And of course, who can forget that visual? Again, this is a moment that was organic. It wasn't a moment they were trying to create. That's the problem sometimes these days. They're trying too hard to create a moment. That it just comes off as very contrived and phony at times. This just happened and it became iconic. Austin refusing to give up like a true babyface. And he's still technically a heel here. Oh, he's been getting cheered a lot. And the push-up, the blood dripping down the face. Like, oh my goodness. And I was like, oh my God, he's not going to give up. I was actually thinking, it had me convinced he's not going to give up. How's Bret supposed to win this? I'm thinking Bret might lose at this point. Then the tease of the escape. Now again, they've emphasized this. Nobody has escaped from the sharpshooter like that. Austin was close. I'm like, oh my God, no, really? But no, Bret hung on. Everything was just perfect. Finally, Austin is still struggling. Finally, he's starting to lose more energy. You see it. He's fading. And finally, he's just out. Shamrock did a great job here, yelling it out. If you do not respond, I'm stopping the match. Match is over. Bret wins. And right away on commentary, some people say they were annoyed by this. I think it was perfect. They emphasize that's the story they're trying to tell. Steve didn't give up. Bret looks good because he won. Austin looks good because he didn't submit. The match had to be stopped because he couldn't continue. Both guys are put over here. And then Bret does something that he's never done before unless somebody truly deserved it. He's done it to like the likes of Lawler and whatnot, but he actually beats up on Steve after the match. The crowd is turning against Bret heavily now. And then he's kicking him while he's down, going after the knees. Shamrock gut wrenches, like grabs Bret from behind with the go behind waist lock, and just takes him down. Takes him down with the waist lock. And then there's a tease with those two fighting, and the crowd's ready for that. And then Bret does something else he's never done before. Walks away. Walks away from a fight. The crowd realizes Bret is not the guy he once was. And for that, they hate him now. Everything he had represented for the last several years was gone. What started out as a more positive than negative reaction, I'd say it was 95-5 now, negative. The majority of that crowd saw Bret for who he had become. A bitter, nasty, pissed off shell of himself in terms of character and what he once represented. He's flipping fans off at ringside. Again, the thing that he had criticized the likes of Austin for doing. His obsession, despite the win, despite winning the match and being triumphant. Look what it had done to him. And Steve, as the referee trying to help him up, he gets up, he stuns some of them, and walks to the back, bloodied, soaked, after the beating he just took. Walks away on his own power, and he's cheered. You can't tell a better story than those two have. Everything from the build-up to that moment. And even some of the stuff they'd even do after this. Just superb wrestling. This is what makes me love wrestling. This is why I do this podcast. And it is still my all-time favorite match. So that's going to be a tough act to follow. Yeah. So next up, and again, to be fair, this match actually wasn't bad. It was actually a lot of fun. The Pearl River Powerhouse, Ahmed Johnson and the Legion of Doom, Legendary Road Warriors, taking on the Nation of Domination, talking Farouk, Crush, and Savio Vega. This was a lot of fun. Now, obviously, the backstory here, Farouk comes in dressed as a cosplaying LARPer or whatever, gladiator, Roman gladiator. It looked bad. As Farouk Assad, thankfully, that would change now. Of course, he came in attacking Ahmed Johnson, legitimately hurting on Ahmed's kidneys and putting his career in jeopardy. Ahmed was in the midst of a huge push at this point. He was the Intercontinental Champion, and was actually quite popular with fans. And his career just went downhill after that. Him and Farouk just had the feud that would not end. And then, you're going down. Oh my God. Thankfully, they wrote Farouk off of TV for a few weeks after, during a pay-per-view where Ahmed attacked Farouk with a 2x4 backstage. And then the whole gladiator LARPer thing was gone, and he was the leader of the Nation. More suited character for him. The Nation of Domination, again, the closest thing to it you get these days is probably the Hurt Business. And again, don't get offended when I say this, please. Yes, the group was made up of angry African-American men, plus Crush from Hawaii and Savio Vega from Puerto Rico. I'm not trying to be snarky, but that's how it was. But basically the concept was, and again, Farouk even said this in promos, being held down by the man. And whether or not this would fly today, and I definitely wouldn't, this definitely would not fly today. But again, Farouk was passionate about playing this. You could see it. He was passionate about this character, and he played it well. Whether you like it or not, whether it's too risque or controversial for you, he played the character well. Crush was just kind of around. Again, no disrespect to Bryan Adams, who I've known, not Summer of '69, who I liked. I've liked more often than not. At this point, the whole Jailbird Crush thing, I didn't dig it. Savio, I actually liked Savio. His heel turn was just kind of weird. Just seemed like we got nothing else to do with you, so we'll just turn you heel, I guess. I don't know. Man, to be fair, that's probably, at least Savio still got a few more months out of this, and then he formed the Bariquas. Talk about stereotypes. But anyway, they're part of the Nation at this time, and also you had JC Ice and Wolfie D, PG-13, who was a pretty solid tag team down in Memphis for quite some time. Jamie Dundee, fucking douchebag. Oh, I watched this guy's shoot interviews, and I just want to put my fist through my computer screen. But anyway, Clarence Mason's there. D'Lo in a suit before he really had a name. But I recognized him from some of the Smoky Mountain stuff I'd seen at this point. So, Legion of Doom had just returned in February. They returned, I believe, during the ECW episode of Raw. Oh, okay, I gotta digress to that. The ECW episode of Raw, where ECW invaded, Heyman was there, and it was just not fun. And I remember, I don't know if I talked about this in the ECW podcast or not, but they invaded. Some of their top guys just kind of showed up, didn't do much, and then the rest of it was just kind of thrown together. They didn't really make the most of it, it seemed. But it was the hype there, it was because they were obviously working behind the scenes with Vince to build up their pay-per-view. Their first pay-per-view was only a few weeks away at this point, barely legal. So it kind of helped promote that, and obviously it held the show. Actually, did a solid number for at least for an indie promotion in Philadelphia. I know they traveled elsewhere, but still, for an indie promotion, their first pay-per-view actually, from what I recall, did okay in terms of numbers. Like it did all right. So anyway, that's when they returned. Legion of Doom returned that night. They had a run in WCW. They hadn't been in WWF since kind of Hawk walked out in '92, but they had been in WCW a bit. They've been in Japan. They've been kind of all over. But this is their return to WWF, and hey, that Road Warrior pop was still there. They were still over like Rover, but not obviously the Road Warrior pop wasn't as big as it was in the 80s, but still. They never lost their fans. Again, this is kind of a hometown show for them because they were built from Chicago. And this was a fun brawl. The Faces won. So it was okay. But again, look what it had to follow, though. That's why this match doesn't get looked upon too fondly, but it was fine for what it was. I was entertained by it. I was really into it. And then came the main event. Now, Shawn Michaels strutted to ringside, obviously having a very successful smilectomy. No problems with his knee, it's seen here as he danced around, and he was about to do commentary for the main event. Of course, the main event is for the WWF Championship, the champion Psycho Sid taking on The Undertaker. Now, again, I was looking forward to this. Now, Bret comes out, cuts a promo on both guys, he gets his ass kicked. Taker just kind of watches it happen. It's kind of cool. Because, he gets pissy at Taker for slamming the cage door on him. And to be fair, Bret had a point there. And Shawn Michaels was criticizing him from the commentary table. And Bret's kind of calling him out too. And just such good stuff here. And then, after they get rid of Bret, the match finally gets underway. Now, Taker at this point, despite the fact that he was a top guy, he'd only had one title reign under his belt. He was a heel at the time. It didn't even last a week. It was just whole back and forth with Hogan. So fans, again, this was, I think a reward in a way for his hard work and all the work he'd put in for the past several years of being one of the top guys. One of the loyal guys who stuck around when everybody was leaving. He still had a huge following. A following that would actually still keep growing over the years. And this was his reward. It's like and even as a kid I felt he deserved it. I knew nothing about him behind the scenes, as I would later learn, but just him as I just knew he deserved to be a champion. And the fact that he had remained so popular all these years and it hadn't happened in so long really built up the moment. He dressed up in the gray gloves and the boots, like vintage Taker again for this night. You knew it was special. This match, again, not looked upon too fondly. Again, it was alright. Again, we even watching it recently. I'm like, this isn't bad. It was fine. At least it felt like a main event match. Like, even though as a kid I didn't see Sid on that level, at least I felt that, at least this seemed like a main event to me. Bret tried coming in and interfering again. Shawn, you see, was getting annoyed. And then the finish comes where Bret tries to interfere again. Sid goes after him, but that leads to Sid walking into the tombstone. Of course, the rumor story is Sid shit his pants when it happened. There's been really no confirmation of that. At least that I've seen. I don't know. I haven't watched any of Sid's recent interviews, so who knows. I don't know if I wouldn't admit it, though. And Taker, the place goes fucking bananas. Banana, as Pat Patterson would say. I jump out of my couch. I remember during that time, my dad came downstairs and he saw that Taker's a champion, and my dad kind of nodded. He's like, good. My dad always liked The Undertaker. And like I said, he deserved it. And there's no "you deserve it" chant back then, but he definitely, that's a chant that would have been accurate at this point. And yeah, that was WrestleMania 13. And of course, I'll talk a little bit about the next night on Raw. Of course, that's where Bret turns full heel. Cuts, some say it was too long, but I thought it was superb and built up really well. Great heel promo. Beats on Shawn's knee after Shawn confronts him. And that's what I love about that whole back and forth. Bret just kind of stands there and listens. And then when Shawn turns his back, just beats on his knee. Bret's a full heel, tells the American wrestling fans they can kiss his ass. Whole set of Bret you're not seeing, so he's full heel here. But of course, as we all know, the fans in Canada, and even fans overseas, don't really turn against him. Again, this was a whole new way of presenting a wrestler and the different way fans thought now. Fans in Canada are like, yeah, Bret's right. Fans in the States are like, oh, fuck you. Again, this was all leading to the dynamic of the Attitude Era. And whether y'all want to admit it or not, Bret is a part of that. I don't care what you think. You're entitled to your opinion, no matter how wrong it is. But anyway. So Bret turns heel. Begins a feud with Sid, which, spoiler, never got paid off. So I guess it was softball season. It was just amazingly done. Amazing. Forms the Hart Foundation after Owen and Bulldog get into a fight the following week. Bret plays Peacemaker, makes up with his two men he was once close with, but then became rivals with. And they reunite. It was a great moment. Lawler selling it was amazing. A guy who hated and despised Bret for years, and vice versa, obviously. Bret Hart has seen the light. Lawler's like wiping his face with a tissue. It was great. It was great. Oh man, such good stuff. And at this point, you got the one and only match between Bret Hart and The Rock. I actually remember the before watching this Raw, being in school, they had to WrestleMania 13, and me talking to John, and I remember saying how the Undertaker deserves to be champion. That match between Bret and Steve was epic, and that's all we talked about the whole day during class. And we got in trouble, well, at least I did. I don't know if he did. Got in trouble for it a couple times. John wasn't very loud. I was, so I probably got more in trouble for it because he never got caught because he was never loud. So John only gets loud when he's drunk. John, I know you listen to this podcast sometimes. If you're listening, you know that's true, buddy. Come on. But no, we were talking a lot about the show, and WWF was heading in a good direction at this point. WCW may still have been dominating, but the WWF was leading to somewhere special. That's right, bro, because Vince Russo is going to take over creative, bro. Nah, just kidding. No, Russo did some good. Okay, I don't hate him as much as others do. He did some good. But that's going to do it for this week's episode. Again, I went a little longer than I wanted to again, but hey, I love talking about this show. I love talking about that match. So I'm going to wrap things up, but I will be back next week again with one more WrestleMania. I'm going to talk about WrestleMania 26. So again, I talk about Bret Hart. That was his return to the ring, trying to settle things with Vince McMahon at last. Of course, obviously it's best known for Taker and Shawn. Shawn putting his career on the line, Taker putting the streak on the line. Amazing stuff there. Edge and Jericho, Cena and Batista. And you know what's, again, people can say all they want about those two. They had mad chemistry, and I'm going to get obviously more into detail about that next week. So the final WrestleMania and this podcast for this time, leading into WrestleMania coming up very shortly for the WWE. So thank you all once again for tuning in. Social media, yes. Follow me at BillChase33 both on Twitter and Instagram. Find me Bill Chase on Facebook. If you want to talk some wrestling, especially some old wrestling, I am down. So until next time, this is your friend of mine, Bill Chase, quoting a wise Hamiltonian when I tell you all, don't you dare miss it. Thank you for listening to Diary of a Wrestling Fan with Bill Chase. If you'd like to make a contribution to the show, just spend some money on Bill's new website, where he analyzes canned meats. OnlySpams.com.